So it's not on any position description. It's dealing with this tricky person on a day-to-day basis. I can be avoidant. I can run away. I can try to switch teams, but I'm going to find another tricky person. So there's something in me that I need to learn about and learn from this so that I no longer have trigger points and I can navigate this more effectively and work with this person to the best of my ability without requiring them to change, because I can't change them. And maybe nobody sees that they're tricky, just me. So I've got to work with it. So it makes it harder for me because it's an added task to my job. But if I don't deal with this here, I'm going to have to deal with it somewhere else.
Welcome back to Team Lab. I'm Corey.
And I'm Angela.
Today, we're diving into the deep end, tackling the prickly issue of toxic leadership and dysfunction in the workplace. Dr. Nathalie Martinek is an author, speaker, and facilitator who helps professionals build relationship leadership capacity and navigate the subtle power dynamics that shape trust, connection, and harm at work. Nathalie is one of the top voices on the topic of narcissistic leadership, which is an area so many of us have experienced with a direct manager, a peer, or senior leadership, but maybe felt powerless about how to shift the impact.
Right. And often this issue is a systemic one. For example, it could show up as a cross-functional trust gap, like teammates in a meeting that sound aligned, and then everything falls apart in the handoffs. Nathalie gets specific about what psychological safety actually looks like. People that speak up, they're taken seriously, and disagreement doesn't turn into punishment. You can empathize with someone without having to agree with them.
And she reveals what happens in toxic environments. You can't be honest because what you say can be used against you.
Nathalie is the author of The Little Book of Assertiveness, the Scapegoating Playbook at Work, and she writes Hacking Narcissism on Substack. If you're dealing with a visible or invisible dysfunction at work, you don't want to miss a minute of this episode.
Let's get into it.
Nathalie, welcome, Dr. Nathalie Martinek.
Thank you for having me. It's great to be here.
All the way from the next day, from Melbourne, Australia.
I'm in the future.
You're in the future. Predict something for us. Predict the lottery.
That I don't know if that's ethical.
God, yes. It would be nice to have those powers. You may not have those powers, but you definitely have many powers. And I am looking forward to this conversation. You are a scientist.
Well, I was one.
Yes.
But I'm a scientist without a physical lab. Humans and my life and everyone else's lives are my labs.
Yes. So let's just say you started as a scientist, and you started as a scientist in a lab. And then things went south, which was, the silver lining of that experience. And I would like for you to just go very quickly over that, coming from, your own words. But the silver lining was that it opened up an opportunity for you to help others in the workplace, in the systems of work with, let's say, dysfunctions, although you go all the way to toxicity. And that's where we would like to go with this conversation today.
Great.
Okay.
Let's do it.
I know. So how do you go from a lab to helping others identify the science, spoken and unspoken, of dysfunctions in the workplace?
Yes. So my last bit as a scientist was in cancer research and studying the process of cancer formation and then tumor metastasis. So that greatly paralleled what I was experiencing in the workplace, which was a carcinogenic environment and the metastasis of certain toxic behaviors, not only just around me, but in me as well. So realizing I had become much like the system that I was trying to fight against, and opened my eyes to the impact that it had. And I became more interested in how that happens, how someone who believes that she is ethical, moral, does the right thing, is a good person, could actually start to behave in ways that are not that. And so that intrigued me once I left the lab and hung up my scientist coat, as it was, and I became more interested in human behavior and what influences us to act in ways when we are in certain environments, because my expertise was in how the environment influences the behavior of tumors and its ability to become mobile and move around and infect and co-opt and hijacked the body's normal functioning to feed and serve it. So it is very much similar to what we know as narcissistic behavior and personality traits that, again, we all have, and in certain environments, certain conditions can bring that out as part of our survival mechanism in order to succeed and fulfill our ambitions, if we're not aware that that's what we're doing in order to succeed and fulfill our ambitions. So that intrigued me. And it's an intriguing topic because we all are all capable of acting against our moral principles in certain environments and not even be aware of it. So I wanted to learn more. And so life has taken me down that path to where I am now.
Nathalie, we've all worked in environments where we maybe didn't feel safe. I don't know if we would call it toxic. Sometimes it was, and we just didn't realize the severity of toxic environments or leadership. Can you talk a little bit about perhaps maybe it's just nomenclature, but the difference between a toxic work environment and psychological safety? We talk about a lot with about our teams that we work with, but maybe expand on that a little.
Yes. So psychological safety, and I'm not going to use like the textbook definition because I don't have it in mind, but my understanding of it is that you're in a team environment or within any group environment, and everyone is able to express themselves, and they do it with respect for each other. So we have others in mind because we don't want to cause harm or be hurtful to others, but we do want to be honest and be able to share feedback and be able to learn from each other so that we can make adjustments to ensure that we continue to have a culture practice where we can continue to share our thoughts and ideas and disagreements and pushbacks and not take it personally and do it in a way that is respectful and thoughtful and purposeful to fulfill the obligations and desires and goals of the group. And when you're in a toxic environment, well, that can't exist because there's a hierarchy and a power structure where certain people need to be pleased and appeased. And to do that, you can't be honest. You can't give feedback that will contradict the unspoken norms or the unspoken desired narratives or even the spoken desired narratives. Not everyone will have the same opportunity to express themselves. Some people can express themselves as they want and others cannot. So there's a hierarchy inequality, whereas psychological safety, from the way I've lived it and experienced it, everyone has a say and everyone is valued and not everything needs to be agreed with, and we can empathize with the other's perspective without needing to agree with each other. But there's a desire to continue to collaborate, cooperate, and work together and learn together and reflect together, whereas that doesn't exist in a more toxic situation where what you say can be used against you, you can experience retaliation by the individual that you've challenged or by the group because they've been enlisted by the individual who's been challenged, who has the greatest power in the group. That again goes unspoken and unacknowledged, but is there. So those are the distinctions. Having said that, you can have a team that is psychologically safe in a wider context that is not psychologically safe. And so usually there's a leader on that team who shields the rest of the group or buffers the group from the toxic aspects of the system. So they don't bring certain information to the group. They don't relay certain information from the group to upper management or broader leadership because they're aware of their role and they kind of wear that for the group. So the group is contained and supported and protected to maintain this cohesive culture, despite being present in a wider, not necessarily toxic, not safe culture where you can't say what you want. Feedback can only be given in a certain way. Most things can't be said. There's lots of unspoken and secrecy, etc.
It sounds like Margaret Wheatley calls islands of sanity. It's something like that. Those pockets of sanity in a wider system.
Yeah.
What affects one thing affects the system. And so the question for you is, how long can that team being shielded by the managers can survive? I don't know. Can they survive? Can they thrive? And can they survive? And for how long?
No, they're going to be internalizing the stresses of the system that they're trying to buffer the group from, especially if they don't have power within the wider organization to influence greater change. So if the group is psychologically safe and we know what we need to do together to create a beautiful functioning team that would benefit others, the wider organization or other teams, the other teams need to have an appetite for this and see it as valuable to be open to want to learn. And there's lots of people who say they're open, but it does require behavior and mindset change. And not everyone's interested in that, but they're interested in conveying and coming across as interested in being a psychologically safe team, or make assumptions that they do have a psychologically safe team. So the manager trying to kind of influence other teams so that we get a more cohesive culture will find some pushback and resistance, and it will wear them down over time. And depending on the leadership structure, if you get a new leader coming in who, again, claims psychological safety is so important, but we already are a psychologically safe organization, then there's nothing you can do about it. You can't contradict them. You can't really challenge them, because their self-image is more important than reality and truth.
Okay, listeners, I think it's worth taking a minute here and add some reflection for what Nathalie just mentioned. What she said made me think of islands of sanity, meaning this idea of creating pockets of sanity in the midst of chaos. What Nathalie has said made me think of that, because you can have a team that feels safe inside a wider system that isn't. And the buffering leader gets worn down over time. And I would also add the team gets worn down over time in these circumstances. And so here's a tool, 3 reflection points, 3 questions to ask yourself. Question number 1. Where does truth get filtered? Where is that, the concealing, the hiding? Where does it happen? What are the meetings? What are the conversations? What are the exchanges? Question number 2. Where does truth get punished? When the truth is exposed, what are the retributions for it? Is it a punishment, known or unknown system, that instead of rewarding truth and the reality of things, actually punishes it? And question number 3 is, when tension arises, where does blame land? So in these situations, when there is some tension, when there are arguments, who gets the blame for it? If you can't answer those questions, trust repair is not a tool that you can use to reveal and make things better. If you can answer them, then you can finally work on the system and see the interconnectedness of things in a wider system and not just the single parts. And now let's go back to our conversation with Dr. Nathalie Martinek. And so how do you show them that is actually, or do you actually show them that is not the case?
Can you show somebody who believes that something already exists and their fragile self-image is dependent on that? You can't. In my experience, what you end up finding out is they always come back to their baseline, which is, we already have these things in place. We are already this.
Right.
So it sounds familiar, huh?
Sounds familiar. It seems like in a system where this dynamic is present, it also can maybe escalate a little bit. You have a lot of discussion on the term scapegoating as something that is very common. Can you talk about that a little bit and maybe give some examples of what you hear from clients?
Yes. So scapegoating is a type of workplace abuse that has been talked about, throughout the years, but doesn't get highlighted the way bullying does, because bullying seems more obvious, is more overt, even though there's covert stages of bullying. Bullying is a personal, somebody assaulting another person, they have a beef with them and they take it out on that person for a variety of reasons. Scapegoating is a little different. It's a systemic response to an internal threat. So the system turns on the individual, but everyone participating in the system can't see that that's what they're doing. They just see somebody who is a problem and they get to wear the blame and the shame of the system. So the system never has to look at itself. They just outsource it or project it onto an object and try very subtly, and sometimes not so subtly, to push them out. So the object of shame ends up exiting and they never have to see it again. And then the system experiences relief. We got rid of the problem. Let's move on. Then the system just keeps repeating the same thing because it doesn't reflect and examine itself. And system is, not this non-feeling impersonal thing. It's made up of people. So there's always one person who initiates the scapegoating process or the playbook that I've defined, because there's one person, another person who is very good at seeing problems or trying to point out ways to improve things. And if you're dealing with a leader or manager, anyone who is insecure, because that's the foundational problem, there's insecurity, feeling inferior, just shame. These are expressions of shame. Instead of addressing it themselves, they start to project it onto the person who brought the issue and tried to make improvements or try to align with processes and policies, or had integrity, or is very competent, or a high achiever. So somebody who makes others, exposes others' inadequacies. So instead of learning from that and trying to improve and learn from that person, they turn on that person. And so usually it takes one person and then they start planting seeds of doubt in others, and others start to believe it because it suits them, because they'd rather believe in a problem person than themselves as part of a problem. So that's the distinction between scapegoating and bullying. So relating back to what we were just talking about, you can have a team that is psychologically safe and very functional. And again, it highlights some of the dysfunctions within the wider organization or in other teams. And then they become seen as the threat and then get turned on.
So
Yeah,
the entire team becomes then the scapegoat.
Yeah, a team can become a scapegoat, or the representative of the team
Leader
can also be the scapegoat. And sometimes it's both, like dual scapegoat.
I don't know that there's an HR program for this to help as an intervention. Have you heard of one?
No, because often HR are part of it. They are participants in the scapegoating mechanism. So what HR person would ever want to admit that they've been participant and contributed to the exile, the alienation and exile of an individual who is actually doing a very good job?
Yeah, I wonder if that ever comes out in an exit interview.
It's a good question. Speaking from experience, it can come out in an exit interview, but by then it's too late. And
Right.
unless somebody has complained, so the next people who come in complain, because they know exactly what to look out
Right.
for, and they
Unless
can name
there's a
things.
pattern.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And we are we are creatures of habit. Everything we do is pattern. So if you can spot it early, because you've experienced it enough times that you can't unsee it, then you could speak about it. But again, you're dealing with people who don't necessarily know there's a pattern or see a pattern and just see you as being petty or oversensitive or, relationship tensions that you guys should just sort it out. So you're dealing with environments that are not very familiar with these patterns of behavior, these predictable and reproducible patterns of behavior.
When I started reading what you wrote about the narcissistic leaders for me was an aha moment. I mean, we all had our share of narcissists in our life. I never thought of narcissism in the workplace, in these relationships at work. You know, we have people in the family, we've dated one or two. But recognizing those traits in leaders, in leadership, has been really a reflection moment for me, and added a filter to leadership and to my relationship with leaders from now on. How you came to identify the impact in the workplace?
Yes. And that's a very big topic in itself, because I want to distinguish between what people refer to as the narcissist, like the narcissistic boss or the narcissistic manager, versus what I like to talk about, which is how we contribute to any relationship dynamic and the narcissistic traits that we each have that are part of it. And so narcissistic behavior is a way to assert dominance and control over another person, over another person's perception of, say, me. And so I try to control their narrative or their perception of me so that I can maintain my ideal self-image. So it's very much about self-preservation. It's a defensive behaviors, self-protective behaviors, and often unconscious. Now, there are those that, subset who do it consciously. They are intentionally trying to control, dominate, manipulate, gaslight, diminish in order to preserve their sense of power and authority, especially when there's somebody who threatens it for just being amazing, competent, or challenging. So those are some important distinctions, because the last thing I want to do is go, that manager is the problem and it has nothing to do with me. I'm part of any relationship. I contribute to any dynamic that can unfortunately get established and fixed. And once you establish a precedent of who's the dominant one and who isn't, when you try to change that and level the playing field with the person, you're going to end up in conflict and potentially retaliation, because that person is hell-bent on staying in the power position. So we can end up with managers, leaders, etc., colleagues, subordinates, who have spent a lot more time expressing those narcissistic traits, because they're often that's maybe what they've been modeled in order to succeed, or maybe that's just their pathology. And sometimes some of those traits are really, really toxic, hostile, dangerous, abusive. And so people live in that state all the time, and they're in that survival mode and threat mode. So if you're in a low trust environment, you're going to see more of these features come out, because again, nobody trusts each other and everyone's trying to get ahead, and it's highly competitive, and there's lots of envy and shame and resentment fueling behavior, but we might be smiling and polite on the surface. At least that's what happens here in Australia. I never really know how people really feel, because there's a lot of this politeness, this kind of subtly aggressive politeness. A little different in the US.
Passive aggressive.
Yeah. I wouldn't even call it passive aggressive. It's aggression, just subtle. Because it's not passive. Someone's actively doing it. They just might not be aware of it. So there's a lot of these nuances, and I hope I'm not making it all confused and going off the question. But you can see these behaviors as red flags in certain leaders. They pass themselves off as, I'm so empathetic and compassionate. Psychological safety is so important here. This is how we make sure we're psychologically safe. And then behind your back, they go and they start scapegoating, someone else. And they started a little bit of a smear campaign against that person. Outwardly, they're putting on a show. So it leads to this cognitive dissonance, especially if you've trusted that person. You want to believe in what they're saying, and you're prepared to deny or ignore some of the other things that you've been hearing about or seeing them do in order to preserve this ideal image, because believing in the other reality has some implications for you, that you're part of a toxic or dysfunctional environment and you're participating in it. So I'd rather believe in the ideal than have to deal with the demoralizing reality. So a lot of us do that. And that's why this narcissistic behavioral traits persist, and narcissistic leaders continue to get promoted, because they get away with being able to act like that and recruiting people to be
Yeah.
their enablers and allies.
Yeah, and I think you're right. It is subtle, and in some ways, they're very charming. And I will tell you a little story. I worked at a company where our leader, we had these big conferences every year in San Francisco, and we always had a big keynote speaker. And one of our leaders was interviewing Malala, who is, right, world renowned, like just won the Nobel Peace Prize. He was interviewing her, but he proceeded to talk about himself every chance he got. And it was mortifying. I mean, because he was very charming. He was just really full of himself. But even that seemingly harmless personality did trickle down to it's okay to sort of exert your power to other leaders. So it was really an interesting lesson in spotting that. And it was, it was a little cringy.
It's embarrassing. And what it shows is this man felt really insecure and inferior around her because she's a powerhouse.
Right.
And couldn't deal with it. His way of dealing with it was, again, asserting dominance and trying to match her and not give her the airtime, even though she's the spotlighted guest. He became the spotlight.
He became, yeah.
And that is one of the things that many of us can do out of envy, because envy is, I want what you have, but I also don't want you to have it. And I want to manage my status anxiety by overpowering you and showing you that I'm better than you. I'm superior to you. So it's so insidious, but that's the force and the fuel behind so many of these behaviors in the workplace.
Is there a way to shift that, to turn that around with an intervention, with coaching, with the work that you do to change that, to stop that behavior? You mentioned earlier, a lot of times is a blind spot. It's something that we don't recognize.
Yeah.
So by exposing it, expressing it, raising the level of awareness, can it be shifted or fixed?
I think so. I think people have to be willing to recognize that any problem they experience in the workplace, they have a contribution to it. Doesn't mean that they're the cause, but we all co-create the situations we find ourselves in, mostly unconsciously. So if people are interested in discovering how they might be a player in this larger game and make themselves conscious of these unconscious behaviors, then they have an opportunity to interrupt that behavioral pattern and make a change, especially when they realize that participating in the way that they are is part of their distress. And to alleviate the distress, you need to enlist your locus of control, sense of agency, to create a change that aligns better with your values or your moral principles. So people need to have an appetite for that. They need to be willing to reflect on their own behavior practices in a workplace and willing to change. And I can't say that's the desire for a lot of people. It's for some people, but I don't think it's for everyone, unless, of course, there's an environment that supports people to face themselves more honestly. And there would have to be I guess, incentive for that.
Yeah, or creates a culture of the greater good, the systemic thinking view of we're here to serve the customers, the generations, the future generations. There's always a greater good that we are in service of.
Yeah, so I think people would have to tap into that mentality to feel motivated to want to go down that path and not be punished for discovering or revealing aspects of themselves. So that's the other drawback. You can have workplace, well-being or these sort of initiatives to raise awareness of how we co-create our environments and our cultures. But during the revelation process, someone could be taking notes and using that information to retaliate in the future. So, if that happens, people are unlikely to participate in that sort of initiative ever again.
Sure.
Yeah. Sounds like we need some psychologists enlisted and embedded in the organizations.
Many do, and they're part of the problem as well, because they come in, they're given high level authority to implement certain programs and projects. And in doing so, they're groomed to already align with the person who gave them that role, like a CEO or a director. And if the director is the bully in a problem, they've already, built a new ally that won't question things. So a lot of
Sponsor, right?
psychologists
Yeah.
are part of it. Yeah.
Yeah.
They're sponsoring. Yeah. They're sponsoring their own ally. So the stories I continually hear, I'm not even surprised anymore. It's like, of course they did that. Of course they're part of it. Of course they've been recruited. So yeah, it's not just a professional title. You need awakened people of all, any designation to participate in in building and sustaining a healthy culture. And
This
there
is
needs to
why
be an
we have this
appetite by everyone.
podcast.
Yeah, exactly.
Well, also on this podcast, Natalie, something that we do here is we ask our listeners for submissions for stories around maybe toxic leadership, dynamics, team dynamics that need shifting. So today we picked a special one just for you. So maybe you can help unpack it. Let me read it. It's from Raina, a listener, and she is working for a large technology company. And Raina says, I'm a director at a software company, and we recently had a reorg of our larger marketing operations team. My boss and all of his direct reports, except me, were laid off. My direct reports were either laid off or reassigned to other teams, while I was placed as an individual contributor on a new ops team with a leader who had previously been in an advisory role or chief of staff to our CMO for more than a year. This leader is smart and ambitious, but also a very manipulative ladder climber who had her own group of mean girls ready to populate this new team. Even though I was told they kept me on because I was a top performer, from day one I felt like a target. Given impossible assignments designed for me to fail, being called out for dropping balls I was never responsible for. Worst of all, this person has the most inauthentic fake facade to her personality that it's difficult for me to interact with her. I've explored other open roles with adjacent teams only to be mysteriously blocked or told the roles were no longer open after successful interviews. It's frustrating to see that her peers, the leaders in other adjacent departments, choose to excuse her abrasive style to keep the peace and because they're all vying for favor with our CMO. I really do love what I do and most of the people I work with. So my question is, how can I alert the authorities to this toxic person? I feel like this is a few bad apples spoiling the lot kind of situation.
Wow.
Oof. It's a lot in there.
Raina, you're very optimistic about your current situation. There's no way to alert the authorities because the authorities already groomed and recruited and participants in this facade, this theater of the workplace. You would need to have your own allies with high status within the organization to be able to get to, I don't know, someone CEO even to try to place you somewhere. But even if you're placed somewhere else, you're dealing with peers of that whoever she's reporting to who will make her life miserable because they're just like tentacles, extensions of that one manager. So yeah, there's no authority you can alert. It's kind of time to look for a different job, I would think, unfortunately.
Yeah, it's hard to see that places and teams are stuck in these perpetuating this power struggle. I feel like there's just it's a mindset that just trickles out everywhere.
Yeah. And, I've heard this kind of thing before, different stories, but when somebody's plucked from a different team and placed into an existing team and not as a leader, as someone under the charming, charismatic, narcissistic type of leader who is very good at recruiting flying monkeys or enablers, and they're seen as charming and amazing because of her proximity to a higher power, people will align with whoever's closest to the power source for their own safety, security, and success. So when you're plucked from one team and placed in another, you're automatically the outsider and will stay that way. And easy person to blame and diminish because if she's a high performer, she's already a threat because she then exposes the inadequacies and the incompetencies within the wider group. Sorry, Raina.
Sorry. Yeah. But sorry for this company too. Like the rest of the teams are just sort of like,
yeah, get out. There's better places.
Yeah. There are good organizations, right? Talk about teams you've talked with that don't have this problem. Have you encountered those or
good question? There are teams. I mean, I can't speak for entire organizations because they're made up of different teams and every team has their subculture. It doesn't matter how an organization identifies themselves and makes claims about the culture they have. It's often, if they have to broadcast it, they ain't it. They're not there yet. It's aspirational. But there are amazing teams because they have cohesion. They genuinely care about each other. They care about the work. They're purposeful. They want to learn from each other. They're reflective. So those are some key ingredients for functional teams. They negotiate. They disagree. They leave space for dissent and are curious about it and want to learn about it. And usually that opens up to some innovation when you allow space for it. So teams that are aware of this, they embrace that. So there are, I don't know about good organizations, but I do know that there are great teams and there are people high up in organizations who see all the stuff going on and they have to be very strategic about how they work with these different players. Because just because they have power, there are other people who have access to power sources as well that they might leverage. So you have to be conscious of that and not lose footing. So it's not enough to be a high performer or very competent. You need to be politically savvy as well. And I don't think they teach this in business school or anywhere because that's the reality. There's the job description that you're given, and then there's the real job, which is often politically driven, and you need to be very diplomatic as well as good at your role in order to manage and navigate these treacherous places sometimes.
On that note, what is a piece of advice that you can share with like a Gen Z that is getting into
They don't know what they're
the
walking
workplace?
into.
Right.
They don't know what they're watching.
And maybe that's a bliss. Is it ignorance
I
is
mean,
bliss?
coming in
Is
with
it
your
ever?
first job, right? If
Yeah.
you're coming out of college, jumping into your first job, this political,
Yeah.
they've heard political environments, but actually living it. I love that question, Angela. What could they do?
What do they do? Good question. Depends on the Gen Z individual. I think for your first job, you always want to make a good impression and you don't know anything. You do need to be a little compliant, but not to the point where people are exploiting you and taking advantage of you and abusing you. So knowing that there's a line and that there's a lot of unspoken and hidden rules of work that no one's going to learn. You learn it on the job. And that just because someone tells you that they are a certain way or the workplace certain way doesn't mean it's that way. So don't take their word for it. See for yourself if what they're saying and what they're doing matches up.
Yeah.
And that's how you know you're in a trustworthy or not so trustworthy environment. And if you're in a not so trustworthy environment or, untrustworthy leaders, then you're not going to tell them your thoughts and feelings and your honest ideas. You're going to keep some things to yourself because they're not going to want to hear that. They're only going to want to hear what they want to hear. So it's learning the game and trying to play it, in a way that doesn't require you to drop your integrity in the process. It just might mean to preserve your integrity, you stay silent about some things, not about people's abuse or your own abuse, just about nobody's interested in your thoughts and feelings. They don't matter there. Just do the job.
Yeah.
Improve yourself and move on.
It's kind of like see where you're aligned, see where you're not. And as long as you don't lose yourself in that gap, that's make your own experience with it. Kind of like that. And it reminded me what you have a really strong opinion about bringing yourself to work or authenticity. Because I learned, and sometimes in the hard way, of no, you can't, or you can't always take yourself to work. And so just to complete for this Gen Z new to the workplace. Yeah. What else can you add about authenticity there?
Yes. Authenticity. I mean, that word has no meaning for me anymore because you can't be authentic. You can only be authentic, your true self, around people that make you feel totally at ease and safe. And the workplace doesn't need to be that place for you. It's a place where you show up and you do a job and you get paid for it. It doesn't have to be more than that. But I think what's happened in the, workforce, well-being, organizational development, they've tried to turn work into something more where you can have meaning and fulfill your values and live your purpose. And that's not necessarily the case. And so it's put all these added things. And so part of that is you've got to show up as your true, authentic self. So I would say, no, don't do that. Be friendly, be warm, be collegial, be helpful. Don't be a doormat, but don't be more than that. Just do your best. And, this is about you and your personal best and being able to work with other people to fulfill, obligation, your job obligations, but also your own professional goals that you're trying to achieve. So I've had to learn that the hard way and just kind of pare back my ambitions and become more realistic about what is achievable in certain contexts. There are places that do want to support you and have lots of resources to enable that and are genuine about it, but that's not everywhere. Sorry.
I think you're pretty realistic.
So many people have normalized this, that it's wonderful to hear you talk about it, even if it feels like where's the hope there? But, if you're in an organization that is just riddled, like there's no way you need to move to there are better places to work.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
There are. And there are places that'll always be tricky because one of the things that any group endeavor, whether it's a paid one or voluntary one, is there to help us develop certain characteristics that, I call that the formative curriculum. So it's not on any position description. It's dealing with this tricky person on a day-to-day basis. I can be avoidant. I can run away. I can try to switch teams, but I'm going to find another tricky person. So there's something in me that I need to learn about and learn from this so that I no longer have trigger points and I can navigate this more effectively and work with this person to the best of my ability without requiring them to change because I can't change them. And maybe nobody sees that they're tricky, just me. So I've got to work with it. So it makes it harder for me because it's an added task to my job. But if I don't deal with this here, I'm going to have to deal with it somewhere else. I might as well nip it in the bud. And that takes strength of character and maturity. And so that's a message I hope lots of people take away because they're often similar vibe to things that we've encountered in our families and our formative years. So if you couldn't deal with it then, you're gonna have to deal with it somewhere else in your life.
Yeah.
Everybody brings their full self to work, whether they like it or not, their baggage included, right?
Exactly.
We are almost at time. It's incredible how fast these conversations go. This definitely was the case, Nathalie. Where can people find more of you? Can you share where they can read what you write? They can hear your voice?
Yes, thank you. They can find me on Substack. I write the Hacking Narcissism newsletter. So you'll find all my writings on workplace and other relational situations there. And there's some interviews that I've done as well, so audio, video. And they can find me on my website at drnataliemartinek.com. And I have an ebook out, the Scapegoating at Work ebook that will eventually be an audiobook and eventually be a print book. But right now it's digital only. And another book, which is The Little Book of Assertiveness. So that's a print book and an ebook. So yeah, those are the places. And LinkedIn. People can find me on LinkedIn. I'm there too.
Fantastic. Well, it's been an honor to have you on Team Lab.
Thank you.
Thank you so
It's
much.
been an honor to be with you both. Thank you.
Okay, so let's go over some takeaways. For me, Nathalie made it pretty clear that recognizing the degree to which a workplace and its people suffer from narcissism and scapegoating dynamics is a first step. And recognizing our own role in sustaining those dynamics.
Right. And whether we are aware of it or not, we do play a role. My biggest takeaway from our conversation was along the same lines. As Nathalie said, there are many organizations where the level of systemic dysfunction is just too high, and often there is no solutions but to leave. With that said, I do want to inject a bit of hope here for our listeners. There are so many more companies out there with healthy or even relatively healthy cultures, with leadership teams who are interested in growth and walking the talk of their values. It's in these types of companies where an outside perspective or some internal change makers can help teams identify patterns that may be hampering productivity or even sabotaging communication flow or undermining psychological safety. And once you can see those patterns, you can start repairing trust, repairing relationships, and the links in between them, like we like to say here at Team Lab.
Well said. So before you go, we want to leave you with one thing you can do this week if the cross-functional relationships or dynamics in your organizations feel a bit tense. So pick one moment that's still taking up space in your mind, or it's what you think about when you can't fall back asleep at night, maybe a feedback session that went sideways, a meeting where you felt yourself go quiet, a Slack thread full of sarcasm and finger pointing. So think about that moment and repair it with one sentence. Something like, I feel like tensions were running a bit high in that planning session. Can we reset what we meant, what we decided, and what we're committing to?
That's it. A small repair, fast. Because trust doesn't get strengthened by ignoring the elephant in the room. It comes back by actually addressing the tiny ruptures that happen daily. This is true for relationships with a team and stakeholder teams that you work with all the time.
Right. And because we are all about solutions here at Team Lab, if you want help seeing where trust is breaking across functions in your organization, we built a cross-functional trust repair scorecard for you. It takes 3 minutes and it'll show you what to fix first.
Yeah, don't we love those revealing tools? Grab it at the link in the show notes
And
on our website, distinctiveteams.com/trust repair. One word, trust repair.
thanks for listening. See you next time.